Welcome to Fixing Sticky Problems in FamilySearch Family Tree. We are fortunate to have Katherine Grant with us to teach this session at Roots Tech. Katherine teaches Sunday classes at the BYU Family History Library and presents at other family history events. Her column on family history ran in the Nauvoo Times for about a year and is still available online. In addition, she's a regular contributor to the FamilySearch blog. Katherine also works as a technical writer and instructional designer with a focus on usability and process improvement. Her current work assignment includes developing training used on mobile devices. Besides family history, she loves uplifting music, thought-provoking books, and fresh raspberries. For this session, you can find, we should be going live at this point. For this session, you can find Katherine's syllabus below the video on Roots Tech. If you would like to access that and download that. So at this point, I'll hand the time over to Katherine Grant. Thank you.
Great. Julie, thank you so much. Hey, everybody, welcome to Roots Tech. Are you guys just excited to be here? And what a blessing that we can communicate via technology. So thank you for taking time to come to this session. Just a few items of housekeeping. Uh, if this actually turned out not to be relevant for people that are on YouTube, so you can ignore this one. But if your audio would interfere with the presentation, we ask you to keep it muted. I know probably all of you have been on a call where somebody has, left their audio unmuted and there's a dog barking in the background or something. So want to avoid that. Per Roots Tech, they've asked us not to do any audio or video recording of these presentations. However, they have given the presenters discretion about photos or screenshots. So for me, I'm totally fine with you guys taking photos and screenshots, but I also wanted to let you know that there is a link to this entire slide deck in the class syllabus. So that might be an easier way to get the information, totally up to you. We are encouraging everybody to leave feedback on these sessions in the app. So just when you are ready to leave feedback, just go to the session, any session in the mobile app. Like it's not just my session we want feedback, but we really, really value your feedback on all these classes. So go to the relevant session in the mobile app and complete the survey, and that will give us input that will help us improve for the future. Okay, let's look at what we've got on the schedule for today. Four sections. We're going to do a little introduction and context, and then we'll talk about a very simple fixing process. I do need to say that it's simple as far as it doesn't have very many steps. In execution, it can sometimes be a little complicated, as we'll see. We'll have a case study that I called Three's a Crowd, and then we'll end up with some success tips for fixing these sticky problems. I do want to say, by way of a little background, as Julie mentioned when she introduced me, I'm a technical writer, so I make my living analyzing complex software systems and then hopefully explaining in a simple way to other people how to use them. That has come in really handy in Family Search because of necessity, it's a pretty complicated system. I mean, there's very easy aspects of it, right? But genealogy is a complicated endeavor, and the software has to reflect that to a certain degree. So over the years, as I've come across, problems on my lines in Family Tree, I've wondered how to fix them. And you guys, I have made so many mistakes and blunders, and I am hoping, and I've asked a lot of questions of very gracious employees at Family Search who have helped me understand how the software works. So I'm hoping in this presentation to spare some people some of the grief and blunders that I've been through. So let's go ahead and get started. A little bit of introduction and context. For the purpose of this class, we're going to define sticky problems. We're not talking about things like just a date being off by a year or two, or a spelling error or a simple variation. We're not even talking about a non-standard date or place name. Those things are fairly simple to fix most of the time, and they don't really compromise accuracy for the most part. They don't cause the kind of problems that we're talking about solving in this class. If you consider your tree here, these kinds of problems are like a little drop on the tree. They do need to be fixed, but they're not major issues. What we are talking about in this class are things like impossible or conflicting dates and places, like a child being born when the mother is 2. Just, it's not going to happen, right? Incorrect relationships, where we've got people connected to the wrong parents or the wrong spouses. And the big one that seems to be implicated in 99% of sticky problems is bad merges. And we are actually going to walk through a simple example of correcting a bad merge. As part of the background and context, I want to explain a concept that has been incredibly helpful to me in working in a shared tree, and that is the concept of intended identity. What do we mean by that? Basically, when someone creates a profile in Family Tree, in our shared tree, they intend the profile to represent a certain human being. And this is the intended identity. The intended identity for deceased people is generally defined by vital dates and places, so births, marriages, deaths, and also relationships. The earliest changelog entries show the intended identity. Sometimes it's more clear than others. It depends on the person who created that person in Family Tree. The intended identity becomes the baseline for untangling problems. Now, let me be really clear about this. This is a concept that I kind of I guess you could say developed or observed. It is not a family search rule or policy. It's just something that has really, really helped me when trying to untangle people. So think of if you have a personal tree, consider that when you create a profile in your personal tree, you know who it's for. Like if it's for your grandmother, you absolutely know what human being that represents. But in a shared tree where we have millions of different people helping each other build our pedigree of the human family, we don't always know what other people were thinking. We don't necessarily know what they intended the person they intended that profile to represent. And so in any shared endeavor, there has to be common understanding. And so if you create a profile for your grandmother and you know you wanted it for your grandmother in Family Tree, but I come in and I decide it's for my great aunt who is a totally different person, and I change it to be my person, that's just a recipe for confusion and disaster, right? We've got to have a shared understanding. And I feel like the thing that should take precedence, and again, this is just personal, but it makes sense to me. The thing that should take precedence is who the creator of the profile intended that person to be, what human they intended the profile to represent. And whenever there's a mess, we want to get back to that original intended identity. Another thing that I found is so critical in fixing these sticky problems is diagnosing the problem correctly. If we try to fix the wrong problem, chances are that the real one will get worse. And I've seen that over and over again. Here's an example that will explain this. I'd like to introduce you to Samuel Hibbert. Poor Samuel has errors on his page. You'll notice that he died in 1855, according to this profile, but he's got a couple of children born after he died. Well, a well-meaning user came in and very logically concluded that a man cannot father children after his death, and so therefore the death must be wrong. And so she deleted the death from Samuel. That took the errors away, but when we dig into the change log, we find that there are about 13 merges on this guy representing about 5 different people. It turns out that the children were added to this profile through bad merges, and they aren't his kids. So the solution was not to remove the death date, which happened to be correct. The solution was to repair the bad merges and get the kids back into their correct families. So at this point, Julie, at natural breaks, we're going to stop and ask for questions. Julie, are there any questions at this point?
We're working through, some people are working through connecting to the
Oh
session
gosh,
directly.
okay.
But the
Then
one question that is here is, are there any best practices for records? And I'm guessing that you're going to get to that.
yes, that is a perfect question and leads into the rest of the webinar. So thank you. Let's look at a very simple fixing process that I would consider to be a best practice. So after correctly diagnosing the problem, so you know what you're dealing with, you know what went wrong, here's what I found is the best way to fix it. The first thing you want to do is look for bad merges in the changelog and then fix them if there are any. The reason that's so important is I've discovered through challenging experiences that if you wait like till later in the process to undo the bad merges, it mangles things even worse. Like suppose you correct birth dates or relationships or whatever, and then undo the bad merges. The bad merges are likely to mess up the work that you've already done. So you definitely want to check for bad merges, fix any that you find before moving on to the next step. The next step is to fix the incorrect relationships. And again, the reason we do it at this point is that this will also have a trickle effect. And if you try to do it earlier, then later on, when we get to the third step, it might mess up as some of the relationships. The last step, once you've fixed the bad merges, fix the incorrect relationships, then you go through every profile that was part of the mangle and fix the incorrect information such as birth, marriage, death, and also detach any incorrect sources and add any necessary sources. So that is the very simple fixing process. This is in the syllabus. Let's now see how this applies to an actual case study. So I'd like to introduce you to the Parkinson family. As you look at this, in the interest of time, usually when I teach this class for BYU, we stop and do some interaction here. And unfortunately, that's not possible in today's webinar. But as you look at this, just see if you notice any problems. Well, here's at least one of the problems. This family has three kids named William. Now, for this time in England, that is actually not necessarily a problem because often if an older child died in the family, later on they would name another child by the same name. So having three Williams is not necessarily bad, but let's take a look. The first guy has a historical record, a christening actually. He was older, he was 10, which is a little unusual. But the christening is definitely for him, and he is alive in 1836. That's 10 years after the second guy was born in 26. So this guy is still alive. The family is probably not going to be naming another kid the same name, and they're definitely not going to make the same mistake a third time for this third William who was born while the second one is still alive. So clearly there are some problems on this family. And most of the time when this type of thing happens, it is due to bad merges. So for purposes of this webinar, we're not going to walk through all three, but we are going to walk through the first guy and see what happened to him and then see what we have to do to fix the problem. So does he really belong to these parents? Again, in the interest of time, I'll tell you, usually this class is two classes when I teach it for BYU. So it's a little bit condensed. Here is one place where I have condensed it a little bit. Um, so we'll just very quickly go over the research that helped me determine who this person really was. So first of all, William's intended identity, when we open the changelog and we scroll to the bottom, this is what we see. This is very helpful because it's so specific. This profile is meant to represent the guy who was christened on the 29th of December in 1830 or 36 at the King Street Methodist Church in Haslingden, Lancashire. His birth date is the 25th of June, 1824, but notice there is no birthplace. And that is often the case on English christening records at this time. If the birth date was even included, many times it wasn't. It was just the christening date and location. But here it was a nonconformist record. If you're familiar with that, they were a member of a church which was not the state or the Anglican, the official church. They were Methodists. And so they kept their own records and they did write down the birthplace or birth date, but no birthplace. And then finally, we also have the parents. Thomas, THOS stands for Thomas, and mom is Betty. And Betty does not have a maiden surname. So this is what we know about who William is based on the earliest entries in the changelog. So at this is where we're going to kind of condense things. As I did the research and I looked at the various children in this family, it was actually pretty easy to find them in the census because on the christening record, they actually christened a bunch of their kids at the same time. So I knew it was all the same family. So to make a long story short, this is what I found. All the guys with gray arrows do belong to these parents. The rest of them, including William, do not. So because we're limiting our research or our exploration to William today, we're just going to focus on him. He belongs to a family. So this family was in Bolton in Lancashire. This family always lived in Whalley, and I hope I'm saying that right. I have no idea. But it was very clear from the research that he belonged in this family. He did not belong to these parents. He was not part of the Bolton family. So, what caused the error? That's worth finding out. As we go back into the changelog, we see that William's parents, Thomas and Betty, were merged with this Thomas and this Elizabeth. And Betty is a nickname for Elizabeth, but as it turns out, they're not the same people. So I like to call this the same name trap when people confuse two different profiles that have the same name, but they really represent two different human beings. So the solution here is we need to repair the bad merges. So we're to step one in the process. The first thing I want to do is check William's changelog for any merges on him. The way I did that is, excuse me, clear my throat there. Okay, the way I did that is I clicked filter and then I just clicked the merge button. Probably a lot of you are familiar with that. What that does is it just displays merges in the changelog. So we see here it's filtered to merges, but it says there aren't any merge changes. So no bad merges on William. Absolutely fantastic, means we don't have to worry about him. But we do know from the changelog, from his changelog, that the parents have been badly merged. So let's see how we unmerge those original parents. The easiest way is we're still in William's changelog and we find his original dad and we click on him. When we click on him, his summary card, the dad's summary card comes up. And then we can click on his name or you can click person. They go to exactly the same place, to Thomas's deleted profile because it was deleted in the merge. So we click that and come over here. And when I took these screenshots, a lot of you might notice that this is the old UI, the old interface before they did the refresh, but the same functions are available. And I couldn't retake the screenshots because it's already cleaned up now. The mess isn't there anymore. So, but you will in the new interface, you'll still see a link for restore person. And that just means we want to undelete him from being deleted due to the bad merge. So we click restore person, and then we get a pop-up that asks us to explain why we think this person should be restored. I love reason statements. I feel like they are so incredibly valuable. Not only do they help other people because they become a permanent part of the change log, but they help us. Like I found change reason statements that I've written maybe 3 or 4 years after the fact, and I wonder, what was I thinking? Then I look at the reason statement and I know. So a good reason statement helps you and other people What I've also noticed is it helps me think through my logic. Sometimes I've been writing a reason statement and I stop and go, wait, this is not making sense. And I realize, okay, I'm not ready to do this restore or this unmerge or whatever it might be. I need to go back and kind of do a little bit more due diligence and make sure that I'm really being accurate in the thing I'm about to do. So I also don't believe that reason statements should be very long. I think they should be simple and clear. And so in this one, I basically, because I'm restoring Thomas, that means I don't think he's the same as the other Thomas. Why is that? I explained that here. Well, this guy was born in this place, lived in this place. The other guy was born in this place, different year, different location, and I found separate census records. So therefore, I conclude they're not the same person. So after writing that reason statement, then I click the restore button and Thomas is back. Do the exact same thing for Betty. We're not going to walk through it because it's just exactly the same procedure. Now, this is what I was talking about, the thing that unmerging. Sometimes with unmerging, things get worse before they get better, but it's a necessary part of the process. So now we've got relationship problems. William has three sets of parents, whereas before he just had one. He's got the wrong parents. We already know from our research that they're not his folks. He's got the right ones. These are the ones that we just restored. And due to the bad merge, he's got one more set with the right dad. See, it's HCB, HCB. We know he's right, but the wrong mom. So let's clean that up. We are to the next step, which is fixing the incorrect relationships. So to disconnect the wrong parents, it's a little bit counterintuitive if you haven't done it before, but once you do it, it's not hard. It's just sometimes what we wouldn't expect. So the first thing is if you go to a person's page and you don't see any children, the children's section might be collapsed. If there's a number here, indicating the number of kids they have, but you don't see the kids, it means that the kids have gotten collapsed and you just click this button here and it expands all the kids. The next thing you do is click the pencil next to the kid that you want to disconnect. The pencil looks slightly different now, but you can still tell that it's a pencil. Then this is the part that tends to trip people up or maybe not be quite so intuitive. If I were to click remove or replace next to Thomas, it would just remove him. If I were to do it right just to Elizabeth, it would just remove her, but leave Thomas. But if I do it next to the kid, it removes both parents. I don't know about you, but I found that counterintuitive. But the thing is, once you know it, then it's completely simple. So we know that both these parents are wrong. So we are going to remove them both by clicking this link next to William. Then we get a screen that is just kind of warning us, hey, you're going to be breaking this relationship. Are you sure you've carefully reviewed everything? So you click the checkbox if you have reviewed it. If you haven't, you go back and review it and then come back and, make sure everything's right. Then come back and we want to say remove parents because we know they're wrong and we know that the right ones are already showing up. Then it's going to ask you for a reason statement. Let me comment just briefly on this one. I could go into a lengthy explanation here about how I know that this Thomas and Elizabeth are not the parents and these other ones are, but my feeling on this to explain a bad merge takes so much time and probably nobody's going to read it. And so in this case, I write a very simple reason statement just saying these parents were connected due to a wrong merge. And then if people want to look into it more, they can go to the change log. And this tells them it's due to a bad merge. So then hopefully they would realize they'd have to look at the merge history in the change log. So when you've written the reason statement, then you click remove and it's looking better. We've gotten rid of the total incorrect parents, but we've still got the right dad and the wrong mom. But to disconnect them, we would follow the exact same procedure. So we're not going to walk through that, but somebody might be asking, wait a second, this is the right dad. And if I disconnect him here, isn't it also going to disconnect him here? It doesn't, fortunately. When you disconnect, it bases it on the couple. The system bases it on the couple. So William will be disconnected from this incorrect couple, but this couple won't be touched, and he will still be attached to them. So now when we disconnect them, this is what we've got. We've got William, and he just has one set of parents, and they are the right ones. So, but remember that Thomas, his dad, was not only connected to the right wife, but to the wrong wife as a fallout of the bad merge. So to correct this one, we follow a process very similar to disconnecting the kids. We click the pencil icon, and then there will just be another remove or replace screen, and we just click remove. In the interest of time, we're not going to walk through that because, again, it's pretty identical. So we click the pencil and then, sorry, let me go back there. That was a little too abrupt. We click this pencil, we get that other screen that's similar to the one we've already seen, and we click remove Elizabeth because she's not his wife. And on the explanation, I would just say Elizabeth was connected to the wrong Thomas Parkinson through an incorrect merge. And this is what we end up with. We've got William, and he's got the right dad, the right mom, and everything is good. We check Betty's change log. Fortunately, she doesn't have any wrong relationships, so we don't have to do any cleanup on her. And that takes us to the third step in the process, which is to review the information and the sources. And once all this is clean and in good shape, then we can confidently make these changes because now these people are stable. They're not going to be changing anymore through our cleanup efforts. So the first thing we're going to do in our little example here is clean up William's vital information. We want to standardize the birthplace, or birth date, but look what we see on as his birthplace. It lists Bolton, but we know he's not part of the Bolton family. So what's up with that? Anytime you find something like this, the answer is, well, almost always, the answer is going to be in the changelog. So let's go into the changelog and see where Bolton came from, because the inclination a lot of times is just to trust this and go, okay, it says Bolton, that must be right. So now is all my research wrong? Is he really in the Bolton family? But let's look at where this Bolton birthplace came from. A user, I've blocked out the name for privacy, but a user came along. Notice the record was created in 2012. She came along in 2020 and added the birthplace. There's no reason statement. There's no source because it doesn't exist actually, because he really wasn't born in Bolton. But this also doesn't appear to have come from a bad merge. It appears that she just entered it manually. The best guess I can give is that she figured that because all the other kids were born in Bolton and the christening record didn't have a birthplace, and I should say the other kids that belonged to Thomas and Elizabeth Hoyles, because they were born in Bolton, she figured, well, since William is in this family, I guess he must be born in Bolton too, so I'll put it in. But it turned out not to be correct. So it's very helpful to go to the changelog and see how information got added, because then you can assess how trustworthy it is. And in this case, it's not trustworthy at all. So we go back, and these little edit buttons have since been changed to pencils. So if we're going to edit the birth, we just click the pencil next to birth. We get a screen like this. Notice that there are double entries because FamilySearch will show you the original non-standardized date, and then they will show you their standardization. This happens when FamilySearch does the standardization, not a user. If you want to get rid of these double entries, a person at FamilySearch taught me a cool trick. Sometimes you can click in here and it will drop down the standard. But sometimes, especially if the date is already there, you have to click in here and like click at the end and then hit your space bar and it drops down the list of standards and then you can select the standard. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to click this and standardize it, accept the Family Search standard. I'm going to remove Bolton because that's not where he was born. As it happens, I could never find a record that had his birthplace, but the christening showed him being christened in Haslingden. And Whalley was a village, or I'm not sure technically if it was a village or a hamlet or whatever, but it was actually in Haslingden according to a map of the time. So I thought to be safe, and Haslingden is the larger jurisdiction. So to be safe as far as a birthplace, I'm going to infer that it very likely was Haslingden. So here's what this looks like after I have standardized the date and I have deleted Bolton and put in Haslingden. Notice that I say here that the birth date was provided on the christening record and the birthplace, I'm very upfront and transparent about it, that I'm inferring this. I don't have proof, but I have a pretty strong case that this is his birthplace. So it's inferred from the christening record and the birthplace of his other siblings, excuse me, which in fact was Haslingden. So the Whalley family listed their other kids' birthplaces as Haslingden. So now this is how it looks after I've done all the cleanup. Looking pretty good, huh? No more mistakes here. Now let's go through the sources. So I look at the first source and it matches exactly. Same birth date, same parents, same christening. So we're good. But I look at the second source, it's for the Bolton family. So I know I've got to detach that source. And just as an FYI, this source turned out to be wrong as well. And the right source was not attached for the 1841 census. So I need to detach both these sources. And sometimes people have questioned saying, is it okay for me to detach sources that are wrong? Absolutely, it is in our shared tree because we're trying to improve these records, right? And if you leave bad sources attached, sources that don't apply to this person, Family Search uses that information to provide record hints. So if bad sources are attached, Family Search is likely to dish up more bad record hints because the system assumes that, as it should, that these sources are correct. So we want to get rid of all the wrong sources. Here's how easy that is to do. We click the source to expand it. Then there's a detach button. We click detach and we explain why we're detaching, that this source doesn't apply to this person. And then we click detach and the sources are removed. Now, as a very important part of the cleanup process, I'm going to make a point with this next one. I want to add the 1841 census. So I click the Family Search logo, which searches in Family Search historical records. And it was very easy to find the correct census because it's in Whalley, it matches my research. But notice the little pedigree icon? It means this source is already attached to someone. And I know it's not attached to my guy because it wasn't in his source list. Well, Family Search tells us who it's attached to, totally different person. So at this point, I could go down a rabbit hole, which I do not want to do because it makes me crazy. You guys have probably experienced that. The key here is when you find things that you think are going to lead you down a rabbit hole, just make a note of them and move on. So I don't want to disrupt my review of sources and information by dealing with this possible duplicate, or maybe it's the result of a bad merge. I just don't know at this point. It could be a tangled mess. So I'm just going to make a note of it and move on. So now I'm going to Thomas's page. I'm going to, before he had no vital information, which is part of the reason for the bad merge. But because I found him in the census, I was able to add his birth information and I expanded his name because Thomas is a well-known abbreviation or excuse me, THOS is a well-known abbreviation for Thomas. You should only expand it if you're certain, but there are like WM for William, HY for Henry, that type of thing. If they're widely used and widely known, and other records show the expanded name, then it's completely appropriate to expand the abbreviation on the profile. And we do the same thing for Betty. But another reason Betty got merged is because from the christening record, she had no maiden surname. I want to walk through how easy it was to find her maiden surname so that I could add it and prevent future bad merges. So let's use a very important genealogical principle, which is to use what we already know to discover what we don't know, because that builds a solid foundation. So I made a timeline grid for this family. It's just a simple research log that allows you to capture information from censuses. So we've got the 1841 here and the 1851, and we've got all the family members listed in the far left column. So I want to look for a marriage record of Thomas to Betty because that should list her maiden name. So how do I know when to look? Well, I can deduce from their ages they probably wouldn't marry before age 18. So I want to start my search about 1814. They probably wouldn't get married after the birth of their first child. I have seen it happen, but probably not. It's the exception. So our range here, we're probably going to find a marriage between 1814 and 1822. And at this time in England, women usually got married in their birth parish. Well, Betty is here in the census and she's listed as being born in Haslingden. So I probably want a marriage between 1814 and 1822 in Haslingden for Thomas Parkinson and Betty somebody. So I do a search in FamilySearch historical records using all that information, and look what I get. Two options. I look at the images, which I don't have copies of in this presentation, but there was nothing to help me distinguish. So I have no idea whether my Thomas married Betty Ashworth or married Betty Barnes. Well, there is a clue, that a thread we can pull on in the 1851 census. Sadly, by then, Thomas has died, and Betty has remarried to a man named Henry Barlow. That marriage would have taken place between 41 and 51, and later marriage records in England will often list the father of the bride and groom. And that is exactly what we find. So I find this record. It's for a Henry Barlow, exactly right name. It's in Haslingden. I know that's a little hard to read. Betty Parkinson, it's her married name, which is what we would expect. She's a widow. The farmer occupation for Henry matches his occupation in the census. And look who the dad is. It's Henry Barnes. So now we used what we knew to discover what we didn't know, and we are confident that Betty's maiden surname is Barnes. So we go back and put that in, and it's looking really good, and we add the marriage date, but look what happens. When I add her maiden surname, FamilySearch does more searching and finds two more possible duplicates. And one is the other wife. But you probably noticed that those marriages took place very closely together. So did Thomas marry both Bettys, or is the Betty Ashworth a totally different one? We don't know at this point. So as I wanted to pop over and just see, let me go back here, who these people were. And so I popped over to one of the records, saw the Betty Ashworth. Is that the right one? Shoot, let me go back. Yeah. Notice that this ends in MPG. We come over here and MPG and a bunch of Williams. I don't know if you remember from the timeline grid, but these are a bunch of William's siblings. So they are connected to yet another set of parents. And we actually know that this Betty Ashworth is not the mom of some of these kids. If our Thomas married Betty, this one, it was before he married Betty Barnes. And so we'd have to just research that whole thing. What I wanted to point out is you can very much feel sometimes like you're fighting Hydra. Do you remember the story of the Greek myth of the monster that every time you would chop off one head, two more would grow? So the way that you get past this, really, the key is to write things down. And there are so many ways to do that. Paper, Google Doc, a research log. You can Google and find many types of research logs. Keep it in a spreadsheet, keep it in Evernote. Use Trello, which is kind of an electronic post-it note program. Timeline grid, we've mentioned. You can Google that because time does not permit us to go into that in great detail. I do want to go into detail a little bit, though, about Goldie May, which I totally love. This is a free, well, it's an application that is specifically designed for family history. There's a free version and there's a paid version that, of course, has more features, but it integrates with FamilySearch and it's got some amazing features, such as the ability to link to FamilySearch PIDs. It's got a subway map that can show you anomalies in dates and places. So if you're interested, I have just loved this, and I'm not being paid to promote this software. I just have found it incredibly useful. So if you're interested, go to goldiemay.com. People always want to spell it M-A-E, I've noticed, but it's not. It's M-A-Y. So just a heads up on that. Okay, we are so close to the end that I am just going to go ahead and run through these tips and then open it up to questions. So here are some final tips. Success tip number one is to prioritize. You can't do or fix everything, and that's okay. You don't have to. So just decide what you want to focus on. Success tip number two, be methodical. Don't be slapdash or just take things in some random order because it will just turn into a bowl of spaghetti. So follow a process and write things down. I've made some templates that have helped me undo bad merges. This is one that's been particularly useful where I just have a column that allows me to compare all the people that are involved in the merge. And then I can say, is this person the same as this one or this one or this one? And then I can say, okay, if it's 15 merges, person 1, 5, 6, and 9 all look to be the same. Person 2, 10, and 13 look to be the same, et cetera, et cetera. So if you'd like that template, these are all free. I just made them and they were useful to me. And I thought if they're useful to other people, I'll just put them online. So they're actually on my website, which is goldenrodgenealogy.com. I'll show a link at the end, and it's a website of just completely free resources. There's no upsell or anything. It's just if you find it useful, you're welcome to it. Number three is to be part of the solution instead of being part of the problem. And let me be very let me explain. I don't want that to sound blaming at all, because like 99% of people who make mistakes in Family Tree do so unintentionally. They don't get up in the morning and go, I am really going to mess up Family Tree today. There are some malicious actors. Some of us have come across them, but the large majority of people really are well-intentioned. So we can take steps to be part of the solution instead of adding mangles to Family Tree. A big one is don't assume. Don't jump to a conclusion that two people are the same just because they have the same name. Don't jump to the conclusion that this boy belongs in this family just because the parents' names seem to match. The next one is use what you know to discover what you don't know. That allows you to build a solid foundation from known information to what you want to discover. Don't merge unless you're certain they're the same people. I used to think that duplicates were the biggest problem in the old system, New Family Search, and then in Family Tree, which we've all been using since 20, or well, it rolled out in 2012. I've since become convinced with the number of bad merges that I continually find, to be honest. A week does not go by without me finding a bad merge. I believe now that bad merges are the biggest problem, and I think our focus should be on preventing bad merges and undoing them. So a simple step is don't merge unless you're really sure that the two profiles represent the same human being. And finally, do your best to add accurate information to Family Tree. And here's a bonus tip. If you've gone through this presentation today and said, oh my goodness, this is so complicated. Well, you're right. Undoing bad merges, if there's more than just one or two people involved, they do tend to get complicated. But what I've found over the years is that as I've done it and as I've built my skills, it's just like exercise. It definitely gets easier. So take heart. So, by way of summary, today we gave a brief introduction and context about sticky problems. We outlined the three-step fixing process and then used it to walk through this case study. And we wrapped up with success tips. So, everybody, thank you so much for coming today. Here's the link to the website. And once again, a link to this presentation is in the syllabus. So, this slide deck is open to anybody. You can download a copy for your reference, and it has all the links that you can just click and get to it. So, Julie, let's open it up to questions now. I believe we're supposed to stop at about 8:50. So let's go ahead and take as many questions as we have time for.
Okay, thank you so much, Catherine. There is a ton of helpful information and it's so detailed in your presentation. I want to reassure everyone that this has been recorded and that it will be available on the Roots Tech website going forward. So you can rewatch it, you can pause it, you can go along through the process with Catherine as you do that, in case you didn't catch all of this the first time around.
Which would be understandable. It's
Yes,
complicated.
yes. There are a number of questions that have to do with contacting other contributors about the changes that they have made, whether that's through messaging or trying to work out documentation with them. Do you have any input or best practices for doing so?
Oh, that is such a great question. For minor things, I don't contact people, but if I feel like my changes might cause issues for them, then I will try the messaging system in Family Search. The trouble is, a lot of people don't know what that little red dot means up at the top next to the thing that you can click. In the upper menu on Family Search, you can click that little. It looks like a call out. So you can click it and see your messages. And if there are unread messages, it has a red dot. But in my experience, so many people don't know that that's there. So I will use that first of all. If I don't hear from them, or if they have an email, I'll use the email. But to be honest, a lot of times people just don't respond. And so in that case, because it's a shared tree and we are encouraged to correct it and make it as good as possible, I go ahead and make the changes. And then if someone does contact me, I respond to them and explain why. And I also always try to make sure that I've added really good sources so that if somebody comes out there and looks at it and says, "What the heck was Catherine doing? Why did she change this?" They could look in the source list and go, oh, there are sources that substantiate this change. So thank you for that excellent question.
Thank you for your input.
You bet.
Um, Someone asked if there's a child found that has been mistakenly attached to your ancestor and you don't know where the child belongs, is it better to detach the child or leave them in the wrong family?
Oh, that's such a good point. Um, I would say detach. And the main reason for that, and forgive me, I know this is a public webinar, but I'll make a reference to the church practices. If you leave the child in the wrong family, then wrong temple work can be done. So that's a reason to detach the child. But the other is just that it's confusing to leave wrong people. So I do detach them. And to be honest, I will usually do the research to try and find the right family and put the child in it. If I can't find them, I'll just leave a note, probably an alert note. Do you guys know about those? So I'll just describe it. We're very close to being end here, so I won't share my screen. But envision a profile page. On the right side, in that panel on the right-hand side, there's a notes option. If you click add a note there, there's a checkbox that says add an alert note. If you click that checkbox and then put your note in there, a banner appears at the top of the profile that says important research has been done on this person. Please read it before making changes. And then you could explain, this person was in the wrong family. I've detached them. I don't know where they belong. I've researched this and this and this, haven't been able to find it. And here it is. And then someone else may come along and have a family Bible and be able to fix it. But at least you've left good notes that justify what you did. Thank you so much for that question.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And I really appreciate that you have shared your website and where people can go to access this presentation and more information. So I think with that, we will just say thank you again for being here. And we hope to see you in future sessions of this Roots Tech.
Thank you so much.